Well, there was a benefit to you taking a while for you to come on. I actually managed to read up to chapter 9 of Judith. I read the first 5, but then I went from 6 to 9 while I was waiting for you to get on. So there you go.
Oh, cool. And I was reading the last couple too. I was on like 11 and 12. I didn't finish the last of it, but they were just getting to the good part. And I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, it's good parts at the end, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, the bit that I just read, I think was it chapter 8? No, chapter 9. Judith seems like a really feisty, strong woman, especially for her day and time.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's start with a bit of prayer and taking some deep breaths and settling down into that place where we best communicate with God. Lord, your word inspires us and encourages us, teaches us, and helps us to get to know you and your people. Be with us as we continue to study your word. Some of the lesser known to us anyway, parts of your word. And we thank you for being with us in this conversation. Amen. Any final thoughts on the end of Tobit? Because we had the last couple chapters for Tobit to look at.
Going back a while.
Yeah, it was back a while.
Well, actually, one thing I do remember from that, what stood out for me was he got married. They had 2 weeks of partying, celebration, all that sort of thing. Then he went back to his parents' place with his wife, at which point they then had another 7 days of celebration. I said to Stephen, do you imagine how much that would cost in today's money to have 3 weeks straight of celebrations?
Yes, that would be enormous.
I know in India when they have weddings, they can be pretty pricey and pretty lengthy with celebrations and stuff. But I just found that was really interesting how 2 weeks of celebration, then the travel across back to his parents' place, then another 7 days, stayed there until his parents died, and then went back to his in-laws as he promised. So
no wonder they ran out of wine in Cana. Oh,
yes. And then I also found it interesting that his wife Sarah had 7 children, and she'd lost 7 husbands prior to Tobias.
I didn't catch that.
And they were all males.
Nice.
7's a magic number.
Yes, it is.
It's a very important number in the Bible.
But the fact that she'd had lost 7 husbands, married Tobias, then had 7 children to him, all of whom were also male, I just found was rather intriguing.
Yes. There was a little bit on chapter 13, like verse 6. I really liked that. And at the time, it really, 6 and I think 10, it really spoke to me about where I was at the time and about like, turn to him with all your heart and all your soul. Do what is true before him, and he will turn to you, no longer hide his face from you. After being in such a dark night for such a long time, it really spoke to me that it's not God who moved, but me. Mm-hmm. and that I had to turn back to the ways that God and I communicated all along before that I had kind of like moved away from. Now that I'm getting back into some kind of a routine, it feels good. The communication lines are open again. So that's just something that really spoke to me in the moment.
My mother used to have a saying that if you ever feel that God is far away from you, who's moved?
Exactly.
Because it ain't God.
Exactly.
I mean, that may sound flippant, but I had an experience of that not long after I moved home down to Melbourne. I was living on my own. And I was thinking about that, and it's like that's something I never wanted to experience, but it never ceased to play in my mind that if you feel like he's not with you, then you're the one that's moved away from God, not the other way around. Because he's there,
Yes.
he's waiting for you, but you need to realize that that's what's going on and move back. So I always, even now, that image every now and then will come up, and it's actually quite powerful when you think about it.
Yeah. And the only contradiction to that would be John of the Cross, who continued to practice and continue to seek God. And, I think in the Song of Solomon, where sometimes he chased God, sometimes God was chasing him, but yet at the same time, he felt at a great distance from God for a while. And he coined the term dark night of the soul, from what I understand. And he was continuing to try to be close to God, but felt that he didn't feel it was a punishment, but something that God turned God's back upon him, so that he was trying to get God's attention, but God wasn't paying attention to him. And sometimes that's what it feels like from our perspective. But there are a lot of things that, well, then you try a different tact. You don't try the same thing that you've always done and expect different results, So I don't know. That's just the tangent I was going off on. But yeah, John of the Cross would be the only contradiction to maybe that statement, but yet maybe it isn't a contradiction at all.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
It may be that God's turned around to lead you somewhere else and you're still back here.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. That's neat because that you said that, because through my faith imagination prayers for a long time, sometimes I feel like I'm a little sheep and I'm just trying to follow Jesus's heels through a dark forest on this little skinny path. So following in a new direction, that's, I've been thinking of that this week too.
It's scary.
Yeah, it is scary. But yet it's that comfort of at least seeing his feet. So in faith imagination this time through, I remember grabbing onto the end of his robe with my teeth and not letting go. So I was even closer and I wouldn't lose him, and my attention wouldn't be drawn by everything else around me. So, yeah.
Interesting thought that came to my mind with that verse that you quoted, verse 6. It's an awfully long verse. I wonder if that's actually the longest verse in the Bible. We know which is the shortest verse.
Yes.
But that's a very, very long verse.
Yeah, it is a long verse. Okay. Anything else on Tobit before we turn the page?
I don't think so.
Okay. Now to Judith. My reference says that it's definitely a novel. It was written from 135 to 100 BCE.
Okay.
It was never part of the Jewish scriptures. It was useful for personal devotional reading, for the Roman Catholics and Orthodox. Now let's see. Something interesting that it notes in here is that the reversal of gender roles and the absence of miracles. She's a childless widow who manages her own affairs, which we'll get into because I think she's really cool. It kind of mirrors sometimes the Judge Deborah, the 10th peg through the temple. And although Judith continually turns to God in prayer, she must develop her own strategies, carry it out, and at the crucial moment, take her sword in her hands. It talks about the literary structure being an envelope, where it starts with, it comes back to, it alludes back to, but it may be in the opposite way. That's what my notes start out with. So what were your initial impressions of the book so far?
I found the first 5 chapters pretty depressing, mainly because Stephen and I, up until about a week or so ago, were studying or reading through Jeremiah, and I didn't realize that Jeremiah was so down in the dumps. I would say he's actually even worse, at least initially, than Isaiah was in first Isaiah. And so went from that to this, and it's like, oh, really? More of the same stuff. Nothing much has changed. But then it started to pick up, I found at chapter 6, because I think that's where we started getting, did we start to get an idea of who Judith was then, or was that a bit later?
I think she comes in
chapter 8, actually.
Let's see. I believe you're right. I think it's 8. Yep, Judith comes in, her first is 8:1. Yep.
But she it's very much setting up the scene of everything that was going on and all the bad stuff that people were doing and not following Christ, and the same old,
Yeah.
which seems to be very much a theme, particularly in the Old Testament. So it gets a little bit wearying after a while, particularly when you know that the people aren't doing the right thing, but you keep hearing that they're not doing the right thing. It's like, where's the hope? Is there any hope? Can we please have a reprieve? Even if it's only for 5 minutes. We need a reprieve.
Yes, well, you get the reprieve a bit later.
Yeah. But along those lines, isn't that how life is? Like how God looks at the people, like, will they ever learn? It's like God's like this ever patient parent. Like, and I know I keep having to relearn the same lessons over and over again. It's like, God, why did I have to go through that again? You know, it's like, when am I ever going to learn? When is it ever going to stick? And it's like, that's how humankind is.
Oh, I don't deny that.
Yeah.
But I think just constantly hearing it becomes annoying. And especially in light of what's going on. I don't know what it's like over there in America, but what's going on over here with interest rate rises and stuff, it's just, I think it's just a bit too close to home. That's probably the biggest problem.
Well,
it's emphasizing.
The Fed's just upped the US rates by another 0.25%.
Yeah, we've been having some economic problems too.
Yeah.
Yeah. The inflation is going up and more people are losing jobs, and the cost of everything is skyrocketing, and there's no way to pay for it, you know, for gas and food, and the essentials are going up.
Reading this sort of stuff is really bringing that to home again.
Yeah.
When you really don't want to constantly hear about it because you know that it's like that, you're living through it.
Yeah.
And it really is a case of when are they ever going to learn? when is somebody going to actually come to the fore and say, no, this needs to stop, we need to reverse it and start again? That's really what this is all talking about. You know, we've done all these things, done all these bad stuff, and we know why all this is happening, but we're still going to keep on doing the same stuff anyway, even though we know, like you were saying before, you're doing the same stuff even though you're going to get the same results.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time and energy, actually.
I just looked up that song, you know, with the refrain, "When will they ever learn?" 1955.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're still not learning.
Tis true.
But you go back to the Old Testament, you know, the same as right now, and we still don't learn.
I just thought she feels like, for me, it's like she feels like Wonder Woman.
Yes.
Like the typical fan fiction, the superhero thing where everything is so dark and the bad guys are the worst, and you know everything is going to heck in a handbasket, and you have this super bad guy whose riches are beyond whatever, that he has this huge capital and this huge army and huge riches, and he's like taking over the whole world, their whole world at the time, and people are bowing down before him so that, like, I'll serve you, just don't kill me, you know. It's like he's like blowing through everything, but he's snubbing his nose at God.
I was thinking, as I was reading about Holofernes and his tent, I'm thinking, jeepers, that must be a huge blinking tent that he's in, and a huge contingent around him. You know,
Yeah.
they'd probably take over half of Western Australia just to be there.
Yeah.
What I found interesting is how it was the men for the period that we're talking about, that it was the men that eventually came to Judith, a woman, and asked for her help and to plead and intercede on their behalf to God, which she then did.
Yeah.
So I found, because for a man to approach a woman back then, just for starters, would have been something that would normally not happen. But then to ask this woman to intercede for them as men to this God so as to not make their situation worse, would have been an even more massive thing for them to do.
Yes, absolutely.
My computer is named after one of the first women leaders in the church in that scenario. Huldah.
Oh, okay. It's not Magdalene?
No, Huldah. Text was taken to her to verify that it was text from Deuteronomy.
Ah.
And she confirmed, yes, this is what you should be doing, and brought about a big change.
Cool.
So it's not it's unusual, but it's not unheard of.
I didn't remember the guys coming to her.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah, I'm looking for that. But they were terrified, and they tried to make their war tactics the best that they could, but there was no way of escape for them.
Yeah, chapter 8, beginning at the 31st verse. Since you are a God-fearing woman, pray for us so that the Lord may send us rain to fill our cisterns. Then we will no longer feel faint from thirst. Then Judith said to them, listen to me, I am about to do something that will go down through all generations of our descendants. Stand at the town gate
Right.
tonight so that I may go out with my maid, and within the days after which you have promised to surrender the town to our enemies, the Lord will deliver Israel by my hand. Only do not try to find out what I am doing, for I will not tell you until I have finished what I am about to do. Uzziah and the rulers said to her, Go in peace, and may the Lord God go before you to take vengeance on our enemies. So they returned from the tent and went to their posts. So
But
if they went to her,
she has a first encounter with them in the chapter before, around verse 9. Oh, wait a minute. I underlined that too. When Judith heard the harsh words spoken by the people against the ruler, because they faint, lack from water, she heard all that Uzziah had said to them, how he promised under oath to surrender the town to the Syrians. She sent her maid, who was in charge of all she possessed, to the elders of her town. Then 11, they came to her.
yep.
So So she sent her maid, but they came to her.
Yes. They didn't have to.
No, of course not.
And back then, they more often than not probably would have ignored the maid because she was a woman.
Definitely. But this gal,
That shows how much power she had.
Judith is like in the ones before that. I wrote Proverbs 31 woman. Beautiful, rich, smart, pious, free, because she didn't have any kids and didn't have a husband. She was like the Jewish Wonder Woman, I wrote in here. But apparently she was wise, because she had all, and her servant had to be wise too, because she had charge of all her household and her maids and stuff like that. She was like her second in command. Her maid, who was in charge of all she possessed, her maid to be in charge of what? Yeah, I'm just waiting for Zara to come back in here.
Back again.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I really loved the way she's portrayed. I mean, it's so like, why did the heroines always have to be rich and beautiful, and like beautiful so that men fall down at her feet? I'm like, seriously, just have a regular woman for a change. No, but and I loved her double entendres, that what she's saying is going to come true, but not in the way Holofernes or whatever, however you say his name, not in the way she knows he will take it. And where did she get the water to bathe in if they didn't have any water to drink?
Which chapter is that in?
Well, when she first, no, 10:3.
I haven't got that far.
She removed her sackcloth she had been wearing, took off her widow's garments, bathed her body in water, anointed herself with precious ointment.
Well, this is God's scriptures, so he's the God of miracles. So maybe it was just it appeared there from out of nowhere.
Or they still had the water for ritual baths, so that they could stay pious. But it wasn't drinking water. It's not something you drink if people have been bathing in it.
Well, I suppose if you think back to the old story about the baby in the bathwater got fairly dirty, but it certainly wasn't drinkable. You could still bathe.
Well, the baby was always the last one. Like,
yeah,
in the Old West, I think if this is the story you're thinking of, and for anybody who listens to the recording later, I think the story you're thinking of is that when there was a large family, they had one bathtub, one hot water, and the father would get into it first, and then all the rest of the boys, and then the mother would get in, and then all the rest of the girls, and the babies were always last.
Yeah,
yeah.
that is the story.
So the water was so dirty by the time it got to the baby that you're throwing out the baby and the bathwater. I absolutely loved this one saying in here. It's on 9. Oh, you didn't get to 9 yet.
I've done 9.
9 verse 10 at the very end. To crush their arrogance by the hand of a woman.
Oh, yes. I like that. Must make a note of that. See, us women are a lot stronger than we give ourselves credit for.
You got it. We all need our superheroes. We all need our mentors, the people that we can look up to and emulate.
Mm-hmm.
And although she seems larger than life, she doesn't seem so out of it like a superhero that we can't attain to. And in such a patriarchal society, when mostly what they had was male role models and stuff, for a woman to have, you know, an Esther, a Judith, a Ruth, you know, a Judith to look up to, it must have been a very popular story among the women anyway.
I reckon so. Don't know if the men would have liked it.
Aha. Yes.
Particularly because the men went to a woman for help.
Yes, they hadn't succeeded. They needed some help from a woman.
Precisely. It's the fact that it was a woman that the men felt they had to go to get the help they needed.
Yeah.
That I reckon would have embarrassed them. So they probably wouldn't mention any of this.
Let me write
Yeah, the
that in my
translation
mind.
I've got in front of me finishes off, shatter their pride by a woman's hand.
Is that what yours says?
That's what mine says, yeah.
Oh,
Use the guile of my words to strike them down. She had to be a fairly educated woman.
absolutely.
And what's more, what's that say about the quality of the men?
Well, it does say that it goes to great pains before they introduce her to say that they were pious, they were following God's Deuteronomical laws, and then when she gets involved, she's following the same laws, because some of the first things that she says before she chastises them for their lack of faith.
Mhm.
In 7 at the end, before she's introduced, actually, let God judge us, about the being punished for our sins, even though it said before that they were doing things right, and that she was joining them in their sackcloth and ashes. And I don't know if I read that into it or if I read it somewhere, because I can't find now a reference to that effect.
Well, at the end of that chapter, it looks like the assembly was pretty much giving God a timeline to work to. Chapter verse 30, it says, Uzziah said to them, meaning the assembly, courage, my brothers and sisters, let us hold out for 5 days more.
Yeah.
By that time, the Lord our God will turn his mercy to us again, for he will not forsake us utterly.
Yeah.
Setting the agenda for God.
Yeah.
I'd like to know how he knew that God would help after the 5 days or at the 5-day mark. Where was he getting this information from?
And I think that's her point.
Yeah.
Who are you to put God to the test today and set yourself up in the place of God in human affairs?
Mm-hmm.
No, my brothers, do not anger the Lord your God. If he does not choose to help us within 5 days, he has the power to protect us within any time he pleases, or even destroy us in the presence of our enemies. It ain't up to us.
And God's 5 days is probably very different from our 5 days.
Very
Yes,
true.
but they were probably also looking at how much water they hadn't got and how much food they hadn't got.
Mm,
and say,
Yes.
well, we've only got this much left. He's got to act within that time, or else we're going to be dead.
Yes.
yeah, but if I know anything about God, as we've said before, he is the God of brinksmanship.
Oh, yes.
The God of what?
Brinksmanship.
What
In
is
other
that?
words, he takes you right to the edge.
Ah, yes.
And just when you don't think there's any chance of it turning around, he turns it around.
Yeah.
Like at the 11th hour type thing. That's why I
Yeah.
say he's from
To
our
prove
own
that God-
experience.
To prove that God is God and you've come to the end of your rope. So it
Hmm.
can't be you that created success. It has to be God. It can't be you anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the God of brinksmanship.
I'll have to remember that.
There is a comfort in that actually in some way, in a weird way. That even right to the very end, he's still got it in control.
Yeah.
We just don't see it at the time.
Is that something you guys coined? Brinksmanship?
Yeah. From personal experience.
You mind if I steal it?
No, go for it. We actually have another coin, another phrase, which may come up at a later stage. It's one of our favorites.
What?
I think my other half knows the one I'm talking about. Do you?
Which one?
The one about the authorities,
About?
about the hierarchy in the church.
Oh, yeah.
We call them Gnostic Pharisees. That's why I say that may come up in a later reading.
So, Stephen, are you with an independent church? Are you with a what denomination that's there in Australia, or?
I've always been what's classed here as an Anglican,
Okay,
Episcopalian Jew.
like a Church of God, a Church of like England type of
The
Anglican?
Church of
Church
England,
of
yeah.
England.
Gotcha.
Used to be called Church of England here.
I
Yeah.
was born and baptized in Church of England, and came to Australia while it was still called the Church of England in Australia, and then it became the Anglican Church of Australia. But
The smells and bells. I love it. I'm
But I'm sure that that's bound to come up at some point in our study of this. I think we're being slowly eased in gently on this. We're being given some sort of easy ones to work with. with Tobit and Judith so
yeah,
far.
I think the next one, Esther's going to give us a run for our money.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one.
I might send you a list of what's here in the Revised English Bible,
Okay.
because it is chopping and changing all over the place. But what they've tried to do is put it in sensible order.
That I would like to see. Because you're right, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Somebody else had probably done that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you. I would appreciate that.
Yeah. There are lots and lots of bits thrown around the place, but
yeah.
that's fine.
I know that we're not talking about Judith. I'll investigate that when I get there. But
Yeah, we will. Yeah.
Anyway, getting back to Judith.
Okay. Let's see. I like your idea, though, Stephen, about that they probably only had 5 days of water left, and that's where they came up with the 5 days. That makes sense to me.
It does
You
make
may make
sense.
sense of something.
Yeah.
No,
'Cause it wasn't just an arbitrary, oh, let's just put 5 days on it. They seemed too smart for that at the moment, but they were smart enough to prepare as much as they could before they went up on the mountains. You know, they were smart enough to find a tactical place where they could, you know, shoot stuff down at people coming at them. and that their enemies had to funnel through a narrow opening in order to get past to get to Jerusalem. So they were like the gateway into the area that they would have wanted to conquer. So they had to go through that place. I think I'm referencing the notes here that I underlined, but because it said it was setting the stage. And I know some of the places are inaccurate and the timing is inaccurate, and the where the kings are in relation to historical is inaccurate. But these notes say that it's set up that way to let you know that it's fiction and it's not set up to be real. But it does say something about, the mountain pass. Oh, both of these places are, this was in chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, the notes for those two. Both Bethulia and however I pronounce that other name, are unknown and probably fictional. Their importance lies in their location, guarding the mountain passes that were the only access route to Jerusalem. So if they wanted to go in and knock down the temple again, they'd have to go through that mountain pass in order to get there. And it was only, where is it? I remember reading it, it said it was only wide enough for like 2 people at a time to pass through side by side. The approach was, there it is. That's in the end of verse 7.
In which chapter?
4:7. Ordered them to
Yeah,
seize
the approaches were wide enough
mountain.
only for 2 men at most.
So they were at least smart enough to figure out a tactical way to protect themselves.
Do you know when, I can't remember, and I should because it's one of my favorite group of people, when the Templars were around?
Yeah, during was it the Second Crusade or the first set of Crusades? 1500s.
So it would have been
The
well
end of the
after this,
medieval, the end of the medieval period.
because their main job was to protect travelers on their way to and from Jerusalem
Yes.
on a road that was narrow and would go up a mountain. So you're talking about that. I'm thinking, is this the same place they're talking about? And are these people actually Templars or the forerunners to the Templars?
Well, the Templars were war tacticians too. So they had to be. They were a military force as well as bankers.
Yeah, well, they read a red cross to indicate their connection to God.
Yes.
And it was a very important amongst the Christian Crusades. They were a very important people. But you talking about them, and I hadn't even twigged on that, but them going up. I remember reading about them how they would actually, their main role was to protect travelers going to and from Jerusalem from marauders and other
Yes.
people like that, because otherwise they'd end up dead.
Right.
And they saw their job as something
Protecting the
that
travelers.
was God-given. It was a calling to, they end up becoming very wealthy, but that's a side point. But they would be on narrow roads, which is where a lot of marauders and that would be. And they spoke about Jerusalem. Jerusalem was their main hub, I suppose you could say, that they were protecting. And so I'm actually wondering whether these folk were in fact the forerunners to what became known as the Templars.
One never knows.
Which would then explain, well, in my head, it would then make sense why this particular book wasn't included in the main canon, because I think from memory, whilst the Templars were considered to be an important group of Christian soldiers, there was some angst amongst other Christians about what purpose they actually played and didn't agree with it. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's what this was going on about, why they refused to include it in the main canon, because the people that decided what went into the main canon did not agree with the inception, with the instigation of this particular group of people.
But
Yeah, the problem there is that the Templars were 1500s. The canon was done in 400s.
400s,
and
yeah, that's what I
300s.
was thinking too.
Yeah. So the canon would have been done well before that.
But if these were what I'm saying is, if these people were the forerunners to what we now know as the Templars, or what became known as the Templars, there may have been some angst amongst the people who decided what would and wouldn't go into the canon, as to them not wanting this included in the main canon because of who they were talking about. They might not have known them as the Templars. They may have been known as something else entirely, but they ended up becoming what was known as the Templars, and what they did wasn't agreed upon by the people who decided what was to go in the canon, because they argued over everything and they would pick and choose.
It's hard to know that from a historical perspective. Would be a hard thing to prove from a historical perspective. But I mean,
intriguing
it had
idea.
to come from somewhere. I mean, the Israelites always had a faction, a protective or a warlike faction. Wasn't one of the tribes, one of the 12 tribes, assigned as the warriors, just like we had a priest class? Am I remembering that wrong, Stephen?
Don't know.
Sorry, my brain goes off into all sorts of weird tangents and sees connections where there probably aren't any. But
mine does too. I describe mine not an outline form, but as a spider web, because this connects to that, and all of a sudden it connects over here, but that connects back over here. I feel like my brain is a spider web.
But then they all make sense. It all sort of, you can actually see how they all interconnect.
Yeah, it makes sense to us. I just wanted to say, I loved the other turn of phrase I really loved was in 4:12, the very last words of chapter 4, verse 12. Malicious joy, the malicious joy of the Gentiles. In them, that the Gentiles were destroying and profaning and that kind of thing, and desecrated. And the towns that they inherited to be destroyed, and the sanctuary to be profaned and desecrated to the malicious joy of the Gentiles.
Oh, all right. Okay.
That's one way to characterize the Gentiles.
Got the temple desecrated and dishonored, so giving the heathen cause for gloating.
And did you catch that they put the cattle in sackcloth and ashes too?
Interesting one, that one, yeah.
I think that was funny. And it had Judea and Jerusalem working together at this point, when there were periods in history when that was not the case. The upper kingdom and the lower kingdom.
Oh, yes.
Then I have the word turbans, as if the Jews had turbans on. 4:15, with ashes on their turbans, they cried out to the Lord. Since when did they characterize Israelites as having turbans? Am I reading something into that?
That's Arabic, isn't it?
Yeah. What do you have on that verse?
Well,
4:15.
I've got they put ashes on their turbans. Yeah. What turbans? I don't know where that comes from.
And I don't have any notes about it either.
Well, they did speak Arabic, which would make you think they had Arabs or an Arabic culture. So maybe they had Arabic people in the group amongst Israelites.
Yeah, it's probably meaningless, but it's just something I picked up. It's like, what?
Well, it is unusual because normally when you're talking Israelites, you don't associate them wearing turbans. So
No, you don't.
and you don't often hear about the Arabic side of life when Christ was around. No, they didn't. Did they speak Arabic or Aramaic? No, it's Aramaic they spoke, wasn't
Aramaic.
it? Yeah.
Well, it was the desert, and it was one way that at least the Arab people covered themselves against the heat to keep the sun off their head. So maybe it was just part of the clothing that they wore at that time, and it didn't matter as far as who wore it. I think next time if you agree, I think next time we can pick it up at 8 where Judith jumps in.
Yep.
And talk.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
How many chapters do you want to do?
8 to the end.
Oh,
So 8
yeah.
to 16.
Then you get the good bit.
Yeah.
So you mean 8 to 16?
8 through the end of 16.
So in that case, I need to read.
I haven't read the complete end yet, but I read where she's.
You read the good bit. Don't give it away.
I read up to where they're alone in the tent together, and that's where I stopped.
Who is alone in the tent together?
Her and the head of the army.
It sounds like it's starting to get a bit saucy.
It does get kind of salty there.
Oh, now I'm really intrigued.
It does.
I'll be reading it.
Yeah. I thought that the one thing was interesting on chapter 6, verse 6. Then at my return, the sword of my army and the spear of my servant shall pierce your sides, and you shall fall among the wounded. For me, that was a Christ reference. I see Christ reference in everything, even though that's not the way it meant in Jewish culture, who would have read it. But it just, the spear of my servant shall pierce your sides.
Well, it could have something to do with that. I mean, they did say that back in some part in Isaiah that they thought that there was a reference to Christ's death in that. I've made a note that in the next section it gets saucy.
Yes, it does. But
now I'm going to have to really go and read it.
It doesn't get as deep as Harlequin romances do, unfortunately.
Harlequin romances are pathetic.
I know they are. They're so formulaic. It's like I could write them in my sleep.
Yeah, huh? When I used to read Harlequin romances many eons ago, I used to skip straight to the good bits and forget everything else. Mind you, that usually was about 1 or 2 pages.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much all I read the books for. Forget everything else. It's all.
Okay, well. Thank you, Lord, for our time together. Thank you for the ability to laugh and for insight and wisdom into your people throughout the ages, and even our own interaction with you and with the history. Thank you for guiding our thoughts and our speech, and thank you most of all for the friendship that develops across the world. And we give thanks in God's name. Amen.
Amen. And we give thanks for a wedding anniversary as well.
Oh,
yes, I forgot about that.
when were you married?
Yesterday, 32 years ago.
Ah, ours was April 20th, 38 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I knew him for 8 years before that. So
We met up in June 1990. We're married the following May in 91.
well, before we get cut off real quickly, I'm going to say bye and I will see you shortly. I'll see you again next week, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.